Hello, everybody. This is John McGuirk with Gript Media, with the first in what we hope will be a series of interviews. Well, not what we hope, will be a series of interviews with some of the candidates running in the European elections, which everyone will be voting for on June the 7th. Across this series of interviews, we're going to talk to many of the candidates who are hoping to change the landscape politically and perhaps break through for the first time. And we're also going to endeavour to speak to some of the people from the established parties who are already there to see what they have to say for themselves. We have some ground rules. These interviews are going to be about half an hour long. I'm going to give candidates as much time as they can to speak, but not enough time to filibuster. So when I ask somebody a question, they have 90 seconds in which to answer it before, if they're being really interesting, we'll keep going. But if they're not, I will cut across them. But we'll try and be fair to everybody. We're also going to try and ask people as many of the same questions as possible to keep it consistent across all candidates. And the one ground rule is you talk about yourself. You don't attack other candidates by name because they're not here to defend themselves. Those are the only rules I'll be enforcing. But with that, let's kick in with our first candidate. He is a sitting TD for Meath. He is the leader of the Aontu political party, which is now entering its second, it's third after the local elections in 2019, full set of national elections. He is himself vying for a seat in the European Parliament in Midlands Northwest against 27 other candidates. Peadar Tóibín, you're very welcome.
Thanks very much, John. And you mentioned about changing the landscape, and I would say fair play and congratulations to Gript for its role in changing the political landscape.
Well, we try. We don't try to change the political landscape, but we're definitely trying to change the media landscape. Let's put it that way.
Sure.
I'm going to start with the question I'm going to start each one of these interviews with. There are 27 candidates running in your constituency, or maybe it's even 28. I've lost count. There are so many. Why should people vote for you and not any of the others?
Well, first of all, I believe that Aontu is the only political party that's actually listening to the people. So the recent referendums have shown that Aontu is the only party to stand with the people against every other Dáil party. In a range of different issues, we have been the only party to do this. On the climate change bill, we opposed it because of the extra costs it would bring into families and farmers. We opposed the censorship bill, in the hate speech bill, when most of the opposition actually supported the government. Aim to raise the issue of a respectful debate and a common sense response to immigration as far back as 5 years ago, when no other political party would touch this at all. And only Aontu has sought for really a public investigation into what happened during COVID as well, which the government are trying to dodge. So I believe that Aontu is not just the best organised opposition within the Dáil. We're practically the only real opposition holding the governments to account on a range of different issues at the moment. And I think that the work we've done, the level of organisation that we have, that we are best positioned in this European election to really push it to the government, to crowbar our objectives, our values, our ideas onto the debate and make sure that the political bubble is burst in this European election as well.
It's an interesting one because it's obviously a European election. And it's not just, when I'm voting for Fianna Fáil, I'm not just voting for Fianna Fáil. I know I'm voting for the Alliance of European Liberals and Democrats. If I vote for Fine Gael, I know I'm going to vote for somebody who's going to join the European People's Party, which is the party of Ursula von der Leyen. You guys are obviously small and you're new, and I know you haven't formally aligned yet with a grouping in the European Parliament, but you must have some idea about the direction you're going to travel if you end up in Brussels for however long it is.
So we haven't rushed into this. We are in discussions with one European group at the moment, but we are going to be cautious. And the reason being, it's very likely after this election that there will be a change of landscape with the different groups within Europe. We think that a lot of the groups at the moment, may not exist, and there will be some new groups. So we're going to hold our powder dry, but I suppose people would know us in that our major objectives are obviously life, unity, economic justice. Also, I suppose we're a party that's pushed against the woke agenda, and we're a party that's looking for common sense on the issue of migration. And accountability is a really important issue for us, both at European level and at a national level as well. So we are holding our powder dry, and we will be able to tell people in the future about what group we're in.
I always think you guys are kind of in a unique space there, because I think and correct me if I'm wrong, but I can't, because obviously you would share a lot in common on the migration issue, maybe with some people who are more to the right on other issues than you would be. But I couldn't see you being comfortable in like the Identity and Democracy group, for example, who are sort of the so-called hard right, the Parliament. But at the same time, it's hard. You might be more aligned with the left on other issues, but completely misaligned with them on the immigration issue and various other issues, of course, like life and all the rest of it. So it could be tricky for you guys.
Well, what I would say is, and like people often ask about this, I often say that unfortunately politics is kind of like, going into a shop and saying, I want a political identity, and the shopkeeper saying, well, you can have the right or the left. And, if you choose the right or the left, your box is taken off the shelf, and you're basically given, a list of things that you must adhere to or not adhere to. So if you're left wing, you must be, pro-choice, you must be part of, pro-Palestinian, you must be, let's say, United Ireland, or you're etc. But if you're right wing, you must be the opposite. And we've always been of the view that actually we need to critically analyze each issue on the basis of its own merits. And for sure, you do need a political compass to, help you navigate important issues. But we do think it's too simplistic just to box into a very simple full right, full left position on issues. If I'm being honest, I'd probably say that would be considered conservative on social issues, probably slightly left of centre on economic issues, which I particularly say that we're probably in the centre, really, in general space at the moment.
Yeah, or like what a lot of people call maybe the real centre, as opposed to what's often called the centre in Ireland, which is sort of what the Irish Times is.
Yeah, because the whole political spectrum has taken a massive swerve to the left over the last 10 years on a range of different issues. And one of the big problems is, and again, we go back to it, is that the political establishment have really they've no backbone, they've no moral compass, and most of the politics in Ireland now is career politics, whereby people just want to get into politics, keep their seat, and do whatever it takes to keep that seat over the next 5 or 10 or 15 years. And that, it doesn't matter to them what kind of flip-flops they have to do to achieve longevity. Our politics has been different. We've always been of the view, you stand for something, but there's no point in actually being in a seat at all if you're simply just going to implement somebody else's politics or views. And to be honest, I think that we've been proven right in relation to this, because, Sinn Féin, Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, even the likes of the Labour Party, they've been caught flip-flopping to beat the band at the moment. I think that the referendums in many ways have proven to be a watershed politically. Because, for the first time, there was a real proof that the political establishment were miles away from where people stood on a range of different issues. And, you can see, for example, Sinn Féin, doing a complete U-turn on the likes of the hate speech bill and immigration as well. And also, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are reorientating direction, they're recalibrating their message. But that type of politics, that's, show me where my people are going, I must go to the front of them and lead them then. That's the wrong type of politics. Stand for something, believe in something, fight for something, critically analyze, and at times, if the circumstance alters somewhat, you might have to kind of nuance your message or your position, etc. But that makes us different than most of the political establishment. The other thing I'll say that makes us different than the other political parties is there has been a raft of smaller political parties and independents that have, emerged in the last number of years. Some of them good people, some of them not so good people. But one thing I will say is it actually suits the political establishment if the opposition is fractured too much. Because if the vote gets scattered and fractured across a whole range of different opponents, well, then none of those organizations will have the critical mass to be able to challenge the political establishment. Now, we're in a happy position that we're polling around 4 or 5%, depending on what polls you look at the moment, that we have achieved a critical mass, a cohesion and a really well-organized machine on the ground to be able to be a big threat. So we are of the view that if votes land with us, it's going to be a significantly more of a threat to the political establishment than if they are simply scattered and fractured across a whole range of different political parties.
All right. I'm going to put now a couple of questions to you that people have raised, or not necessarily raised with me, but I've heard people raising in the last couple of weeks, like, the case against your candidacy that people make. Question number one. This is a straightforward one. You are in the sort of, and I actually commend you. I think this is really honest because a lot of people don't do this, but you've basically said openly, if I'm elected to the European Parliament in June, I'll be running for the Dáil again in whenever the general election is, maybe next February or whenever that is. So, I mean, some people would say if I vote for Peadar Tóibín, I'm electing an MEP for the next 7 months max, and then there's going to be somebody else in that seat. So, first of all, do you think that's a fair thing to do to the voters? And second of all, who's actually going to be the MEP if you get elected?
Well, I suppose first of all, I'd say I'm probably one of the few political activists that's being honest with people at the start, because all of the parties do this. So, Fianna Fáil did it with Patrick Hope Gallagher, Sinn Féin did it with McCarthy. Fine Gael did it with Simon Coveney, for example. And, I've said at the start that I'm an activist and I'm a campaigner. And my job is not to keep my Dáil seat. My job is to use every single opportunity I have to push what I believe is the agenda of the Irish people forward. So this particular election, I believe, if Aontu wasn't at the table in this particular European election, it will be very likely that our political issues and the political issues, I believe, of the majority of people would not be at the debating table. So the reason I'm standing, first and foremost, is to crowbar our issues onto the debate. And actually, people often ask, what are the great, let's say, tools for changing things? I believe campaigns are the great opportunities to change the direction of a country. And that's what we're using at this European election. The other point that I would say is, ideas are really important too. So, our party is very focused on listening to the people. I think the referendums showed that. So if we have an Aontu candidate in place in Europe, they will be implementing Aontu policy. They're not there as an independent or as a kind of an individual. They will be implementing Aontu policy come what may. So, and that's very clear where we stand on a range of issues. So that's the reason why I'm standing in this election. And that's why we've been up front. In terms of who will be replacing me, we have a panel of people as it stands, and they have been elected by our Ord Comhairle. And the panel consists of Councillor Peadar Tóibín, Patrick Murphy, Luke Silk, Paul Lawless, Grania McPhillips, and Brandon Scott. And they're a group of people scattered from Mayo to Cavan to Meath in that constituency as well. So they're the people who will be potentially replacing me if I get elected to the Dáil, subsequently to getting elected to the European Parliament.
And of course, it should be said, in fairness to you, and I'm not trying to put you down, but there's no guarantee you would be re-elected to the Dáil if you took. So I mean, it's not a certainty.
No, and that's very important to say. Like I've taken a risk in terms of this. I realise that this is a risk. There's if first of all, there's no certainty I'll get elected to the European Union Parliament, and if I did, there would be no certainty I'd be re-elected to the Dáil. But listen, my job, I've always said, the day that a TD's first concern is keeping their seat safe is a day that a TD should no longer be a TD, and we're cursed with that type of politics in this country. My job is, we have only a short time in this world. The country is in a state of crisis, left, right, and centre at the moment. Really dangerous stuff is happening in our country. I have to push with every single effort I can to make sure that we try to get the country back onto the right track if I can. And that's why we're using this European election. I will say this as well, just finally, if I can. I've no doubts that if Aontu win a seat in the Midlands Northwest, and maybe Patrick Murphy in Ireland South and Aisling Constantine in Dublin, I've no doubt if I was the government, if I was the political establishment, I would be far more worried about Aontu taking that seat than any number of independents who are not going to make a systemic change to the political system in this country. All
right. Speaking of systemic changes to the political system, it's actually a good template because the next question I'm going to ask you, because this is one that, and I have said, I was personally shocked by how often this has come up, but it has come up, and people have commented repeatedly on Gript articles. I actually heard somebody say it in the wild last week. A lot of people are concerned in the country about immigration, and they see Aontu running candidates for election who are not of Irish origin. Let's put it that way. If they may be Irish citizens, they may have lived here for 20 years in some cases, but they're not of Irish origin. And those people, and I saw you guys got flamed on social media for this. I mean, some of the abuse was frankly outrageous, I thought, but it was there and it reflected a real concern. And what do you make of that kind of criticism, and what do you say to those people, some of whom I think will be listening to this podcast?
Yeah, so first of all, very clearly, we have been the first party and probably the most active party in the Dáil to critique the government's migration policy. Most of the information that's in the public domain around deportations, around people coming into the country without passports, around the amount of people coming through the north of Ireland, most of that is as a result of Aontu parliamentary questions. So, and it's interesting, we got significantly attacked from the political establishment. They said we were a threat to the cohesion of the country for raising this issue 2 and 3 years ago. But I knew at the time that if this debate wasn't had in a respectful, open fashion, that it would be pushed underground, and people with a negative political agenda would seize upon it to grow, etc. Now, we've also been very strongly of the view that if a person is in this country and they're here legally and they are contributing to this country positively, and they're an Irish citizen, that they have to be treated equally. And I can't say to a person, you can't stand for election because of the colour of your skin. For me to do that, that would be absolutely wrong. And some of the stuff I will say, John, is getting into the ludicrous. Like, we have a guy called Liam Reichenberg who's standing in Dundalk, Omead. Liam's mother is from South Armagh. He was born in New York, of German Jewish ancestry. Is actually his grandparents' generation. Many of them got killed in the concentration camps in Germany. They moved to New York. He was born, obviously, his father was German Jewish, his mother was from South Armagh. He spent every summer in South Armagh as a child. And actually he moved back to Ireland in 1992, and he's been involved in Irish politics since then. And when we selected him, social media lit up and said, Aontu is selecting another foreigner, a New York Jewish banker. And I just went, this place has gone bananas, because you couldn't meet a more Irish person than Liam Reichenberg in terms of his activism, his politics. He's called after Liam Mellows. And if you actually take some of these guys, arguments to the full limit, Eamon de Valera was, also born outside of Ireland, and some of his ancestry is not Irish. Like many of the political activists, Padraig Pearse's background is from England. James Connolly wasn't born in Ireland. Like, I was saying that James Connolly and Eamon de Valera should not be allowed to stand for election because they weren't born here, and some of their ancestry is not Irish.
Well, that's about as fervent a defence as I think anyone could muster on that. For the record, I agree with you. So I'll get shot as well for agreeing with you if somebody's still upset. But I do, as it happens. We don't have a whole lot of time. We have about 10 minutes left. So let's talk a little bit about some issues. I mean, we could talk about the hate speech bill, but that's really a domestic issue. But are there things you can do at European level that will advance the cause of sort of free speech and debate? Because this is not just a kind of an Irish issue. It's kind of happening sort of transnationally. So, like, what are you looking at in Europe where you think you can make a specific contribution that helps Irish people on some of these issues that are concerning voters?
Okay, so there's two things there. First of all, I will say a political activist and a campaigner can do far more than actually what it says in the small print of their office. So when I was a councillor, I stood on the basis of wanting to save the A&E in Navan Hospital. And people said, Peadar, you're a councillor. How the hell do you save an A&E? And that's a Dáil issue. That's not got to do with councillors. And what I did was I founded the Save Navan Hospital campaign. We took tens of thousands of people onto the streets on numerous occasions. And now, out of 10 hospitals that were deemed for A&E closure, only 2 have their A&Es still open, and Navan is one of them. So, the platform to campaign, the platform to persuade and convince people is significant in terms of being an MEP. And that's the first thing. The second thing, I do think that a lot of the stuff that Ireland is dealing with at the moment has its genesis in the European Union. So, there's no doubt that there are ideologues in Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, and definitely within the Greens, around some of these attacks on, free speech. But a lot of this is also coming from the European Union. One of the specific differences between us and other political parties is we are a Euro-critical party. We're not talking about leaving the European Union, but we do believe that we need to start devolving many powers back from Brussels to the nation state. Can we do that by ourselves as a country? No, but we're going to have to start working with other like-minded countries in an effort to try and start that process. And in actual fact, if we don't do that, many within the political establishment want to continue centralizing or outsourcing sovereignty and power to the European Union. That's a big threat to our future. The decisions made closer to the people they affect are better decisions because you can influence those decisions and you can also hold the decision makers to account. When they're made by bureaucrats in Brussels, you can't influence or hold to account. So that's very important. So,
do you not think there's a risk? And I think, because I'm going to put this to you, do you not think there's a risk that when somebody goes to Brussels, that first of all, it's much more physically remote from, I know you might be home at the weekends, but it's more physically remote from your constituents. You're not meeting them as often, but you are meeting all the lobbyists and your colleagues. And there's this kind of sense of saving the world that kind of takes hold in Brussels. And when Peadar Tóibín is over there in Brussels and you got all these MEPs who you become friends with over your months there who are saying to you, Peadar, this piece of legislation that's going to transform Europe on climate change is so transformative. We have to do it for the world. How do you muster the courage to say no to those people? I've got farmers in my constituency for whom this will be bad.
Well, I'll say to that in that the instinct amongst the political establishments here in the South is very much a cap-tipping instinct, very much a kind of that Europe is more important and that we should be deferential to Europe. And in actual fact, if we're to engage in them at all, it should be really, really softly done because we don't want to burn political capital. We want to stay on the right side of where things are at. Now, that has been the political philosophy within the political establishment in Ireland, for 50 years. There's no doubt, and it's just as bad at the moment. But we're very different. And actually, if you look at our European poster, it says, vote Tóibín number 1 to put Ireland first in Europe. And our instinct here is that we actually have to look after our national interests. And it's funny because many other countries, unashamedly, they fight and push and campaign for their specific national interests. But if you look at the Irish government, they're outsourcing to beat the band. So the Migration Pact is the Irish government looking to outsource decision-making to European functionaries who will not make it on the benefit of our country, but will make it on the benefit of the likes of France and Germany. Again, even if you look at the recognition of the state of Palestine, and I know you guys have written about this, and I agree with 100%. You have an Irish government running around Europe talking to other countries about whether or not to decide to recognize Palestine. But in actual fact, the government, if they want to, could recognize Palestine. Even our European policy at the moment is now, even though it's not in a treaty that we have to outsource our foreign policy to the European Union, more and more they're doing it by practice. And Ursula von der Leyen is striding the world stage, representing European foreign policy, and in many occasions, I would say, distorting foreign policy of this country. But it's done so in a very willing fashion. And if you look at actually Pascal Donoghue and Simon Coveney, and nobody knows what they're going to do in the future, but it's very much rumoured that both could take a European job or an international job after this. So I think that even at the upper echelons of likes of Fine Gael, they're kind of looking at Ireland as a kind of county council and where the real power now is in Europe. So if you're personally ambitious for power and, doing well in your career, really the pinnacle of that is no longer the Irish democracy. The pinnacle is in Europe now. And we're only in the halfpenny place to that. And I think we need to reverse that. I do think we need cooperation with Europe on issues that are important like trade and economics, but we do need to return significant powers back to the nation states.
Yeah, I have to say one thing. I think you and I have slightly different views on the wisdom of recognising Palestine, but I think we can both agree that the Irish government could do it in the morning if they so wished. And this charade of running around Europe looking for people to partner with is a little bit cowardly. But let's do some quick fire questions just on that. I mean, first of all, recognise the state of Palestine, yay, nay. Your position is
yes, we would. Yeah, absolutely.
Secondly, let's talk about the whole kind of what's going on in the moment in Europe on the nitrates and the stuff with farming. Where do you think is being done wrong there? What should be improved?
Yeah, so like first of all, I have to say the way this country is being run on a spatial and regional basis is incredibly poor. So we have a lopsided country at the moment. Dublin is overheating in many ways. About a third of the country is now a commuter belt. People are commuting from Ulster, Connacht, and Munster into Dublin on a daily basis, which is incredible. And then a big chunk of our rural and regional areas are emptying of the young people. The average age in Killarney is about 45. The average age in Balbriggan is about 35 at the moment. So there's a big movement of young people into the greater Dublin area. That's because the university type jobs are there. And if people want to get a job, they have to move there. But they can't live there because it's too expensive. So they live about 40, 50 miles away and to be able to handle that job. But farming is also on the back foot here because we have that very Dublin orientated government. And so in the European Union, we have a number of threats coming to farming. So the McGuirk deal is a significant one. Again, a deal being done for German business interests, and the Irish interest of agriculture is not important enough for the rest of Europe to care, and the Irish government are not strong enough to make them care in relation to that. So we have Ireland, which produces its dairy is the most efficient in Europe, and its beef is the most efficient environmentally in Europe. And yet we are being forced into a situation where one size fits all, where our nitrate derogation, it must be lowered to suit the rest of Europe. And the problem is that's going to reduce productivity. If it does reduce productivity, it forces more beef and milk in from non-European countries who are working at far lower regulations. So the net effect is probably more negative towards the environment than actually if we just try to improve production here in this country. And, it interests me, like when you look at Saudi Arabia produces this massive amount of oil, but the CO2 from that oil is not pinned onto Saudi Arabia's budget. We're kind of like the Saudi Arabia of beef. But the beef that we produce, and we export 90% of it, the emissions gases are pinned onto our budget, even if the beef is actually consumed elsewhere. So, on a range of different issues, farmers are being left in the halfpenny place. If you look at the nature restoration law, again, a law accepted by the government without really providing any detail of what it's going to mean to farmers. And while they're making the promise that it'll be on public land, truth of the matter is, if you raise the water table in an area, it's going to be very hard to tell the water table just to respect public land and not to go into private land. There's going to be impacts in relation to this. And the elephant in the room when it comes to farming, which nobody's really talking about, is the fact that we have a supply chain with factories and supermarkets and farmers, a very profitable food market. But most of the profit is falling on the factories in the supermarkets, and they're in an oligopoly power situation. It's a dysfunctional market, and they can push down the price of beef, price of milk, the price of any other product anytime they want. And in a normal country, you would have a competition authority that would check the power of those organizations for a fairer and more functional trade situation. But again, the Irish government is unwilling to do that.
All right, let's talk about immigration. Are there any circumstances, Peadar, in which the Irish government should say that we can no longer live up to what they call our international moral and legal obligations, and should say we just simply can't accept any more people?
Yeah, I do think that we're going to have to start thinking about new processes in relation to this. And I think, first of all, I do think that the government is saying that they're sending out a very strong message internationally on migration. I would say that they're sending the opposite. So the message that's been sent out internationally over the last number of years is, if you come to the country to register for asylum, even if you fail in that asylum application, which will probably take about 10 years, you're unlikely to have you're unlikely to be deported. In 85% of the cases, you won't be deported. So basically that has sent the message that Ireland is a very, very easy place to go to in terms of asylum application. And now we're in that situation where Britain is beside us. It's going to be very, very difficult. They're obviously tightening up significantly, which will have a displacement effect on Ireland. And I do think that we're going to start to have to look at other routes around this. My first objective here, though, I will be honest, is to radically and strictly implement the system first and foremost, so that if a person it comes in for asylum, that's a 12-week application process. After that, if they have not met the necessary criteria, they are deported straight away. that if a person comes through from another European country to Ireland without travel documents, that they're breaking the law in that case. And in most of those cases, that they would have to leave the country as well. I think if the government took those 3 steps in terms of speedy application, proper deportation, and no tolerance for people abusing the identification system, that would send out a very strong message to the migration system, migrants around the world, that only come to this country really if you really, really are in trouble and if you really, really need help. I think Denmark, in fairness to them, are implementing legislation such as that, and it's having a positive effect in there. I also think if a person has a criminal record, either from another country or if they gained a criminal record here, I don't think we have a responsibility to put them up either.
Do you think there's any case for the Irish government having a frank conversation with their colleagues in Paris? Because, I mean, the British, obviously we've heard a lot in the last couple of weeks about people coming from the UK into Ireland. But what about all the people coming from France into the UK in small boats? I mean, should the European Union be doing more to protect the territorial sovereignty of its former member, now neighbour?
Yeah, listen,
that is having an impact on us.
I've always said, actually, and this might sound strange from an Irish Republican, but I've always, from the very start of Brexit, my instinct was always been that it was going to be the European Union's desire to punish Britain as much as possible, to scare the bejakers out of any other country who might even think of going down that route. And I do think that there's that view within the European Union at the moment, not to necessarily cooperate with Britain at certain times, but where there's mutual self-interest, and this has to be one of them. I think it's logical that absolutely that a person who has applied for asylum in France is a safe country. There is no reason for a person to go to another country after that, other than economic purposes. And as a result, that once you've applied for asylum, you shouldn't be moving to another country. And that needs to be the law. And I do think that if the European Union is going to function, we need France to be able to sit down with Britain and Ireland to be able to work out how we're going to operate on that basis. But, again, I'll go back to this point that it is the total incompetence of the Irish government that is half the problem with this. And secondly, there's an ideological bent within the Irish government over the last 5 years not to really see this as an issue at all anyways, because this was part of, I think, the ideology to see countries, let's say, the nation states weaken to a certain extent into the future, and that Ireland would become just a part of that federalized Europe, etc. So, I have no doubt, like if you look at the returns from the Dublin 3 regulations, again, the government didn't implement them. So even where we had the tools, John, even where we had the opportunity to be able to take the pressure off the system, the government never actually took the opportunity. Like I was asking Helen McAtee for the last 3 years, where are people registering? She was telling me they were registering at the IPO. 70% of them were registering at the IPO. And I was like, why would you let people register at the IPO? Because that would confuse the situation. You can't tell how they come into the country if they're registering in the centre of Dublin. So I asked her, how are they coming into the country? And she said she didn't know. That was like in, I think, July 23, she said she didn't know. And I said, why? She said, because we're not asking them. And October 23, I asked her again. She says, we don't know because that information is not recorded. And at the start of April, I asked that question again. And she says, we don't know because we are unable to extract that information from the data. Now, that should be the first instinct of a 5-year-old who is running the system to ask that question. And not only because, you can't manage trafficking, you can't manage smuggling, you can't manage the number of people coming over in student, working or holiday visas who are letting them elapse and then using the opportunity then to apply. And you can't manage the amount of people coming through the north of Ireland in relation to this. You can't manage anything if you don't know what's going on. And the last point I would say on that is, I do believe that ultimately, and we need to treat the island of Ireland as a unit. We do it already in agriculture. We do it now in terms of goods because of the European Union, the protocol. We need to start doing it in terms of people too. So when people land in a ferry port or an airport in the north of Ireland, they need to have a passport. And they need, if they're not Irish or British citizens, there should be a process where they apply for asylum at those ports.
Well, if you can persuade our unionist friends of that, Peadar, although I think I see the merit of it, but you're a better man than
Well,
me.
we did. They had to accept it for sausages. So it's
Uh,
like
well, as I said, no, as I say, I think it's not for me to say, but I think there's merit in it certainly. But
sure.
let's move on to one final issue because we have run slightly over time, but I think our listeners won't mind. But this is the last issue, which is about European foreign policy, common defense, security, all that sort of stuff, and let's talk about Ukraine briefly as well. Should the European Union, which earmarked 50 billion euro in aid for Ukraine, I think it was 50 billion euro last year, should there be continued support for Ukraine against Russia, or should that be wound down and encouragement for negotiations? What's your broad view there?
Yeah, I believe that there needs to be a negotiated truce in Ukraine, and most of the establishment parties won't like that. I do have significant sympathies with the Ukrainian people and the disaster that is happening. I do see Russia as the aggressor here, but I see no way out of the killing fields currently unless there's some level of negotiation. I'm opposed to a European army, absolutely opposed to a European army. Small countries never have any influence over big military blocs, even though we have to provide our young people to be part of those military blocs. And also, I'm opposed to European enlargement. The idea that we would, be taking the Ukraine into the European Union at a time where Ukraine is at war with Russia, and at a time where the government are looking to crowbars into a European army, is just crazy. And Ireland has had a very strong reputation as an honest broker, peacekeepers. We have probably one of our competency is peace negotiations, and I believe that we. Even though we're a small country, even though we have little influence, we should be pushing every lever possible to see can we, offer some kind of peaceful negotiations or discussions or even backroom discussions in relation to what's happening in Ukraine.
Does Ireland have any obligations at all to its fellow EU countries in terms of defence? So let's take the hypothetical. And for the record, I'm not saying this is going to happen. I don't think it is. But let's say the hypothetical situation where the war with Ukraine expands into the Baltic states and the Russians start attacking the Baltic states. Do we have any obligations at all in terms of defence to our EU friends and partners, as the government calls them?
Well, I personally believe that Ireland should remain fully neutral. And, neutrality has been the backbone of, I suppose, Irish politics since way back to Wolfe Tone. And I do think it has served us very, very well. I do think that Ireland, first of all, can't run more than 2 naval ships at the moment, and because we don't have the staff to do it. And we haven't. I think the army is down to about 7,000 now, back down from about 10,000 a little while ago. So a lot of this is theoretical. I think where our actual strengths lie is in relation to peace, through the UN, through negotiations, through our experience north, south, etc. And I think if we were to apply any pressure or any level of competency at all, it certainly wouldn't be pushing our one little ship over to the European Union. It would be actually using our skills in terms of peace negotiations. Obviously, we would oppose any aggressor, but I think we will oppose it with moral force rather than military force.
Well, that couldn't be any clearer. Peadar, I won't take up any more of your time. It's been an absolute pleasure and honor to have you on with us. For listeners who are wondering, we will be doing further these. This is obviously going out on Monday of this week. There will be another edition out on Wednesday and another one out probably next Saturday. We'll try and get through as many candidates as we can between now and election time. But Peadar, and I'll say this to every candidate who's running, best of luck. It's a brave and courageous thing to do, to put yourself on any ballot paper and submit yourself to the judgment of your citizens. So thank you for doing that. There'd be no democracy without people willing to do it.
Thank you very much. You're a gentleman. I appreciate it greatly.
We will talk to you all soon. Thanks so much for listening. Take care.